Welcome, everybody. I'm Marc David, founder of the Institute for the Psychology of Eating. Here we are back in the second annual online eating psychology conference. I am here with a wonderful friend, colleague, Dr. Martin Rosen. Welcome.
Welcome, Mark. How are you doing today?
I am doing good. I am actually looking forward to this conversation. I'm going to say a couple words about you so I can get viewers and listeners caught up to what you've been up to. And then we'll
Okay.
launch into questions. So Dr. Martin Rosen, D.C., is a 1981 summa cum laude graduate of Life Chiropractic College. He lives and practices with his wife, Nancy Watson, D.C., in Massachusetts. He has two daughters, Emily and Erin, both accomplished professionals. For the past 30 years, Dr. Rosen has run a successful family-oriented wellness care practice in Wellesley, Massachusetts, encompassing pediatrics, craniopathy, and organic imbalances. Prevention and behavioral dysfunction issues, as well as treatment for these issues, has been part of Dr. Rosen's approach. He's taught craniopathy and chiropractic pediatrics, great specialty worldwide, as well as lecturing on practice management philosophy and technique protocols. He's written the only pediatric participant guide for sacro-occipital technique, the pediatric SOT spinal adjusting manual, the SOT pediatric cranial adjusting manual, and others. He's taught and lectured at numerous places all over the world, has held some great positions as chairman of the pediatric committee and chairman of SORSI Research Committee, also published extensively. And also what is a lot of people don't know about chiropractics, there's a couple of them out there who are really great clinicians, and there's some out there who are great academics and teachers. And I know, Dr. Rosen, you really embody all of those. And, why don't we dive in? Here we are, an eating psychology conference, and there's a lot of people looking to make change and oftentimes bumping into the wall. What do you tend to see as some of the factors that prevent people from making choices that they know are more supportive for their health, but instead they're kind of going down the same dead-end roads?
Yeah, I think that part of our talk today will address a lot of that issue in different packets of information. I think that one of the things that people really have to start to understand is where those drives or where those dysfunctions really come from.
Mm-hmm.
We look at living here and now, and that's great, but we also have to understand that here and now and where we're at is a compilation of everything that we've come and done, and that's come and gone before. So one of the things that we talk about when we're talking about habit patterns, whether we're talking about eating patterns, exercise patterns, healthcare patterns, is we have to understand where a lot of that comes from. And a lot of it has to do with our large portion of our brain, our midbrain, that is designed to deal with pain and pleasure. Our brain and our body are survival mechanisms. They try and keep us alive. We're fault-tolerant organisms that want to stay alive. So we deal with this mechanism, and what we really don't get is that mechanism, the pain and pleasure mechanism, actually develops by the third trimester of pregnancy. So it's something that's already developed in utero. And it is the process that starts to allow us to respond to our environment. So when we take an infant that's been born and we hear a baby cry, as you start to know this child or this baby, you can see that they have different cries for different needs. They have cries when they're hungry. They have cries when they're scared. They have cries when they're uncomfortable. They have very different type of cries. And this primal drive, this pain and pleasure drive, in the beginning is kind of a soul motivator. I don't want to be uncomfortable. I don't want to be scared. I want to be comforted. I want to feel loved. It's a primal need, and it's developed in this first trimester. So as this starts to occur and as we start to develop into these human beings, we basically base our perception on things that cause us pain and pleasure. What does that, whether it be a behavior that's later on that seems abusive, what we have learned at some point in our life is that it actually caused us pleasure. For example, let's take emotional eating. There's certain things, and I have emotional. When I was a kid growing up, my mom used to make egg noodles with cottage cheese and sprinkle white sugar all over it. And my friend Steve used to come over to the house and we'd eat lunch there. I've known Stevie now for 61 years, and we can still talk about those times when we'd come over to eat that stuff. Now, we all know on a conscious level, sprinkling tons of sugar over egg noodles and cottage cheese is probably not the best thing. but it becomes an emotional need that we sometimes reach for. So in my case, my emotional hook when it comes to food, let's say, is pasta. I consciously decided that I'm not putting white sugar over my pasta, but I'll take the hit, and I'll eat the pasta. So these kind of behaviors become ingrained in us, and as we get older, it looks to the outside world like, well, why are you doing that? It's bad for you, but it's actually these external perceptions that we've internalized, and they become part of our nervous system. And they become basically the who, what, and where you are at that point in time. They become cognitive and motor developments that formed in the early years, which is why I spent so much time dealing with the pediatric population, because I understand that within the first 2 years of life, 90% of your brain function, both gray matter and the white matter, which are the tracks of how your body develops and grows, occurs in those first 2 years. So what I understand and what I see is that this large increase in brain volume and this cognitive ability and this desire to stay away from pain and create pleasure is something that becomes inbred in us. And it becomes a subconscious pattern. So we seek this, and different aspects at different times in our life, we find different things that work for us, that reduce our stress levels. And so as we get older, these habit patterns sometimes become detrimental. Maybe you start out with a drink, in your 20s, like, I'll have a drink, a glass of wine to deal with stress, and then it becomes, 2 glasses of wine, then it becomes a glass of wine every day, and then, it develops into patterns, and which we'll probably talk about a little later. If you have a genetic propensity for some of these weaknesses, they become much more ingrained. So my thought and my ideology is that the number one area of your brain that develops almost 240% in the first year of life is your cerebellum, is the basic brain stem. And there's several things that happen in that brain stem. One is the entrance points for all your conscious and subconscious thoughts, and it feeds your midbrain. 2, it creates what we call a brain reward cascade. And there are literally opiate receptors in that area that create an opiate cascade when that area is stimulated, and it's a primal survival mechanism. So basically, if your survival needs aren't met, and you create a way to create these survival needs, it feeds into your cerebellum, and it basically releases opiates. So you will do whatever it takes to meet those primal needs. If it's positive input, then great, you'll do positive things. If it's negative input, or if you have to create an outside stressor or an outside environmental impact that lowers your stress level, even if it is detrimental, as long as it's less detrimental than the stressful environment. Let's say you're in an abusive environment, an abusive home, an alcoholic parent. Even if it's less than that, even if it's, let's say, shutting yourself down, closing off yourself in your room, and not talking to anybody, you will create a sociopathic or a psychoscious or subconscious way to remove yourself from stress, which will be to shut down. So I think that's what happens, is we look like we're banging our heads against the wall, and what we're really trying to do is get to the place where we reduce our stress level. And that's kind of how I see it through these pre-programmed centers in our brain.
It sounds so basic, and honestly, it sounds so intuitively correct. So what this is reminding me of, back in junior high school, I remember learning that most organisms on the planet are programmed to seek pleasure and avoid pain. And it almost seems a little bit of an insult to us humans to reduce so many of our behaviors and activities to that. But it really seems true with this negotiation that we're consciously doing, kind of managing our level. In a sense, it seems like of comfort almost.
Well, I think the factor is that on a base level, on a base just survival daily level, this is what we do. This is how we function. We have to, create situations where we are no longer faced with pain or suffering. And I think that what happens very often is that these basic needs become survival mechanisms that we honestly live with all our lives, and that the cognitive understanding of it escapes us, because basically in the initial stages of our care or our lives, our brains are kind of these empty vessels. They're in different brain waves, like delta brainwaves, and they just take information in constantly, and they're almost like buying a computer and filling it with all the software. And we have these software patterns in us, and it's just like, your computer. If there are certain things you want to do with your computer, if you haven't put the software in, you can't do it. So you can't even access it. So while it seems so simple or simplistic, unless we can start to access our higher centers and our higher consciousness and our frontal cortexes through the muck and mire of this other stuff, it is actually that simple.
Mm.
You have to create new patterns and new cognitive ways of learning before you can move through that. So yeah, what you learned in high school, and what that book says, everything I needed to know, I learned in kindergarten. It's kind of true.
So really, on a certain level, it's we're such conditioned beings. Here you are, you're tracing, this part of the development of the nervous system back to an early age. And essentially, so many of our behaviors are sort of this forward moving of conditioning that happened ages ago.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's true. I mean, you think about it. I mean, we talk about genetics, and we talk about genealogies, and we talk about having inherited traits from our parents, and it's like we are a compilation of everything that came before us. It's really as simple as that. What we choose to use as strengths and weaknesses may or may not be conscious choices, but you're right. We, like I said, this process occurs in the third trimester. So you're inside your mother. I mean, you're in a world where you're not able to really react. So your only thing that you're getting is stimulus from that outside world.
Mm-hmm.
That's why they do a lot of new studies, different types of music that people listen to, that parents listen to in the childhood and utero. The environment also affects how they develop. I mean, on the grossest level, think of a baby who's born to a crack addict. What they have to come into the planet with, and what they have to deal with, and how hard that process is being. That's the worst case scenario. But it's all kind of exactly what you said. That process is something that we build on. And we can change that. Which will probably, we'll get to address it a little bit, but we can actually change how that occurs. But it takes two things. It takes a subconscious understanding that we're going to put in good input, and then a conscious understanding of where these patterns came from, and a willingness or desire to make them change so that the process or life becomes better for us in certain ways.
So let's start to circle in on that, and these days it seems like neuroplasticity is kind of the catchword when it comes to understanding the brain and or facilitating change. Can you give a digestible kind of explanation of what neuroplasticity actually is, and how does it factor into personal change, personal growth?
I'll try and do that. You're right. It's a new catchphrase. I mean, it's obviously been around forever because it's how we function. But it usually describes what we consider a positive pattern in our nervous system that we use to help us perform complex tasks. For example, if you want to learn a sport, you go out and you practice it, and you practice it, and you create a positive pattern. Like they say, perfect practice makes perfection. And so but we forget that it works in both ways. So it has become clear now. We used to think, at certain points the brain stops developing, stops making synapses, stops making new nerve cells. Well, we know now that that's not true. That it goes all the way through adulthood into old age. We keep making new synapses, which are basically the connections in the nervous system, the roadways that we travel on. It's like if you live in a city that started out with a population of 700,000, over the next 10 years, that city starts to grow to, a quarter, a million and a quarter, or 2 million. They have to make new roadways so that people can travel and connect in that city. Communication lines, in our age, it's new, telephone lines so that we can all connect. So that's what neuroplasticity is. It's the brain's ability, is as you develop more information from the outside, it's the brain's ability to create new pathways so that you can use that new information. Learning, for example, is a very simple form of neuroplasticity. Learning a new language. You create new pathways. You start to hear that language over and over again. People who are polyglots say that how they get to learn or know they've learned a new language is when they start to think in that language. For me, I've learned some Spanish, and if I go to certain Spanish-speaking countries, I can understand, I can get along, but I process it in English. I ask the question in English, I translate it to Spanish, they say something in Spanish to me, I process it in English, so I don't ever think in their language, and I've got to that point. If I was to immerse myself, which is what they say to do, in a culture, when you start to immerse yourself, you create enough neurological pathways that you're now thinking in that pattern. And that's kind of what neuroplasticity is. It's the ability of the brain to constantly make these nerve pathways. And one of the things that happens is that nerve pathways become sensitized from use. So, for example, if you want to develop a golf game and you take a golf lesson, you have to go out there and practice what you learned over and over and over and over again. I remember reading an article on this golfer woman named Michelle Wie, who's, a top flight LPGA Tour golfer. And they said that when she was younger, before she went to school, her parents would send her out. She would hit 200 golf balls prior to going to school every day. That was part of her training. So these situations, they really trigger you in a really negative way. So if you're in a situation where people are yelling a lot, let's say your parents always fought, they always yell, they always screamed at each other, you now have a sensitivity to that. If you go in an environment where there are people who are yelling and screaming, even if, let's say, a relationship with somebody, and that we all fight, we all argue in a relationship, and somebody starts to argue with you or fight with you in a relationship, it triggers that pathway that you've had, that old neuroplastic pathway, and it brings back all that stuff in a cascade. What you have to do in those kind of situations with neuroplasticity is you have to start to change that, because what it becomes is a reflex. If you go to the doctor and they take reflex, they hit you in the knee, you get a knee jerk. It's an uncontrolled reflex. It happens, it goes into the spinal cord out. It's a single synaptic reflex. Well, that's what happens in neuroplastic issues over a period of time. If you sensitize the nervous system so well, whether it be positive or negative, neuroplasticity basically becomes a reflex reaction, how you adapt. If you're trained as a Navy SEAL to survive in certain conditions, you adapt almost instantly to these conditions. You learn how to do it. And that really is what neuroplasticity is. It's your body's ability to create new pathways, i.e. either positive or negative, that are sensitized to environmental input that you have, and that to either use them in a positive or negative sense to continue to grow and develop. So if you want to create new skills, you have to create new neuroplastic patterns. So it's what we all know we've been doing. We've just kind of named the term. We name what we always do, which is to make these pathways sensitive and to develop new ones. Your body is still developing new patterns over and over again. So, and it does it in reaction to stress as well. If you're in a stressful environment, let's say, for example, you're in a stressful work environment, and you're under a lot of stress, and you're maybe a middle manager. So you have a lot of people not only that answer to you, but that you have to answer to. Well, in certain instances, the way we get out of that stress pattern is to create within that particular environment another area. Let's say it's a certain area of development that you could deal with other people, that you have a group of people that you work with, that you're above, that again gives you acknowledgement. And so you create an ability to communicate with this small group of people and to direct them in a particular field or action, because it gives you a positive stress. It can be as simple as sports. You have to work sports. Maybe you're a good baseball player and you have a great baseball team and you're the captain of the team. So that when you go into your work environment and your bosses are coming down on you, which is stressful, or you have to perform at a certain level, you have this other stress pattern or this other field that you can actually function on. It's like, you ever sit in a situation where you're stressed and you daydream about doing something that you know you could do. It lightens the load. So that, again, is another type of neuroplastic pattern, is where we develop hierarchies of stress, the ones that we can't get out of because we feel like we need to be in, whether it be work or relationship, and we take those and we subtalk, there's subsets of those that create non-stressful environments. So it could be in your field, it could be eating. So if you're a good cook, right, you come home and you're stressed at work, so now you create a subset where you're a really good cook. Well, that may be great. The problem is if that becomes the only way to get out of stress, and then your cooking actually starts to become an addiction, and with your cooking comes the eating, and that becomes an addiction, and that's the only way you get out of the stress pattern. So you constantly are cooking and eating and cooking and eating, and so that it just becomes a subset of your life. So dysfunction usually is a subset of the stress patterns that are in your life, and you have to find ways to break them. So you create either functional, let's say exercise, but again, the same thing. You can become an exercise fanatic. I have patients who come in who do spinning classes 6 times a week, then do weight training, and they end up hurting themselves. It's like, no, this is not a functional pattern. I understand it's relieving your stress, but you have to figure out what that stress is, and then find a level that both that pattern and that stressor can kind of balance each other out without causing damage. But again, once you get into a neuroplastic pattern with that exercise, for example, it becomes a reflex. So when you get stressed, you go run. When you get stressed, you go bike. When you go stressed, you just lift weights. And so that becomes basically subconscious reflexes. And that's kind of what neuroplasticity is about. It's creating those patterns.
So it sounds like to me the name of the game ultimately when it comes to using the neuroplastic nature of the brain to one's advantage to make positive changes, it sounds like it gets down to, for lack of a better term, consciousness or conscious intention. You know, you mentioned the term practice, because even in the example where you gave, it's like, okay, somebody adopts the positive habit of exercise. If you adopt the positive habit of exercise, but you're over-exercising your brains out and creating injury, not necessarily a good pattern. You're kind of falling asleep at the wheel in a way.
Exactly. You have to learn to respond to both environmental, internal, and external cues. You know, stressful events absolutely disrupt the rhythmic structure of our autonomic nervous system. So as we know, and as you know very well through a lot of, and I've heard a lot of your lectures about this, the fight or flight state. So what we do is we create these fight or flight states. What happens is if you notice your system is in a fight or flight state, so if I exercise in a fight or flight state, I may perform very highly functional exercise in a fight or flight state, but if I never shut it down, I basically destroy my homeostatic capabilities and for my body to balance, for my parasympathetic nervous system, which shuts it down, to come into effect. So yeah, so it's exactly what you said. You have to have a consciousness to listen to your body and understand what it's doing, and understand if you're constantly pushing it and then, you know, there's great tests for that. You know, if you're in a positive state, and if you stop that positive state, and if all of a sudden you feel like crap physically, emotionally, and even spiritually, you know that what you're doing is basically pushing your limit. You know, it's like being tired and drinking 4 cups of coffee. You know it's not good for you, but if you feel like you, quote, have to get something done, you will do that. So you're right. It becomes consciousness, and it becomes the ability of your body and your brain to get through that survival mode and to get into those higher centers, to allow your body to actually express those higher centers at certain points. You know, what Maslow called self-actualization. Mm-hmm. To get to a place where you can create that, because positive input will create new patterns, just like you said, but you have to make sure that those patterns that you're creating are not just fault-tolerant mechanisms to escape the negative patterns.
It also seems like we're sometimes caught in a double bind, because, you know, there's the activities that I do maybe to create a not so good pattern that's clearly coming from me. I'm making the choice to go for the potato chips or go for the cookies when I'm not feeling well. And it seems like we're also subject to an environment. You know, I can go outside and all of a sudden I find myself in traffic, or I can turn on the news and I find myself living in a stressful world at war. It seems like there's these personal influences, but there's also these collective influences. As soon as you walk outside, you're in the environment that you're in.
Right.
So I'm just pointing out it just seems like an interesting challenge, because we often make it about me, and it is about me. It's ultimately my choices, but at the same time, I think a lot of people. We are
a society.
Yeah. So.
Well, you know, here's the deal, and the deal is that your nervous system reacts. It reacts for survival. It doesn't make judgments. It reacts to be away from fear. Your nervous system doesn't say that potato chip is bad for me. If your brain needs glucose, because it does, it needs, 25% of your body's stored sugar. If your brain needs glucose, it may, you may reach for an eclair, and if your brain gets the glucose, it's cool with it. It doesn't care that you just ate, an eclair might not be good for you at that moment in time. So the only way to break that reflex pattern is to get into higher thought processes, because the only neurological pattern or the only brain function pattern in your body that doesn't work reflexively is your higher thought centers. Because it's always checking in. So your frontal lobe, your prefrontal cortex, as it's making decisions, it's always checking in with the other centers. So it is not a reflex, but the midbrain and below is reflexive. So you have to, so if you're in a situation, for example, perfect example. So I grew up in New York City. I drove a taxi cab in New York City for a while when I was, between deciding what I wanted to do with my life. Now, driving a taxi cab in Midtown Manhattan for most people would look like it's extremely stressful environment. And it might be if it was your life. Now, I knew I was doing it for a short period of time. I had kind of a good attitude. It was kind of an exploration for me. So I never got stressed out. On the other hand, the guy next to me, who's the cabbie, who has to do it for life, who has to raise his family and raise his kids, and this is what he feels trapped in doing, is extremely stressed as a cab driver. So for me, it was an ability to reframe, because I was in the same environment. I was driving in Midtown Manhattan. I was driving in bumper-to-bumper traffic. I was there 8 hours a day. I was in a cab because I was the low man on the totem pole, with no air conditioning in the middle of the summer in Manhattan. Not fun. But for me, it wasn't stressful because I was able to, in my prefrontal cortex or in my higher levels, realize I'm not doing this forever. I'm doing this as a ways to a means, and that I don't really have to react crazily if somebody cuts me off or I don't get a fare. I can just chill and do it. And if I got really stressed, if I felt myself getting stressed, I would just take my cab and drive through Central Park, and take 15 minutes and drive the other. So in what you're saying is you're right. We have to put up with those environmental forces. But if we can move to a different place inside our brain, and I'm not saying we always can do that. Obviously, we can't. We all get angry. We all get upset because it's a reflex reaction. But the less reflexive we are, and the more reflective we are, the easier we can deal with that kind of stress. And that's kind of what the goal is. So if you're in an environment, any environment, it's that old thing, wherever you go, you're always taking you with you. So the baggage is always the same. So until you deal with that baggage, then, you could be living in Colorado where you are, you could be living in Boston where I am, you could be living in the woods in Vermont, you could be living in the middle of Manhattan. The stresses in those areas will be different for each person, and when they learn to deal with those stresses in a non-reflexive way, it can work for them. It can work for them.
Well, I think that's such an important reframe of an example that you gave, and it's so simple in concept, but it really sounds so fundamental to personal health, personal growth, personal change, meaning essentially we have some power to change our story, to change our perception of what's going on. So here you are in this position, in this taxi cab, and you've created a story around it such that it makes your existence not stressful for the most part. I could be sitting in the same cab going, this is the worst experience ever of my life.
Exactly.
And it feels like I'm kind of extrapolating right now to, so many people that I meet with any health challenge or any unwanted eating issue. Usually it seems like the first place we go is, this is really bad. This is awful. This is no good. I shouldn't have this. I shouldn't have this problem. I shouldn't have this weight. I shouldn't have this back pain. What am I doing wrong? And it feels like there's a lot of room for a little bit of positive change in there.
Right. Well, you just touched on something which we could probably spend about 50 hours talking about, which is judgments.
Yeah.
Judging others and judging yourself. The best way to get out of those kind of situations is to reprogram the brain by creating new positive feedback loops. That's really all it is. Positive input creates positive output. So you have to create, your brain's like a filing cabinet. And the things that you think about most are the things that are in front of that filing cabinet. And those are the things you access the most and first. So if you don't start creating new memory patterns that can supplant those others and push them back, then you're going to keep living on those same memory patterns, whether it be your childhood abuse, whether it be what tastes good, whether about the time you just looked in the mirror and saw that you were too heavy or got on the scale and saw you were too bad. If you keep obsessing on those, then those are going to stay in the forefront. That's the problem with obsessive compulsive disorders. Is that you can't stop obsessing on the things because they stay in the front of your brain. If you can start to move something else in front of them, whatever it be, a positive pattern, that will drift back. And it'll be like looking for a file cabinet. You're going to have to, instead of it being on an A, you're going to have to go to Z to find it. And it's going to take a while. The pieces that's hard is for people is that it does take work. You and I are talking, it's all, this is easy, no big deal. It's really hard because if you have tens of thousands of, well, not even actually tens of thousands, tens of millions of synapses that go in one direction, you have to create tens of millions to go in the other direction. So it's not like it happens overnight. The longer the pattern, the deeper the pattern, the harder it is to change it. So yeah, while we can talk about it intellectually, I totally get, and I'm sure my profession and your profession, You see how much of a struggle it is for people because they need not only their own environment, but people around them to help them create those patterns. Because you need an external input as well as an internal input to help create those. But it's about creating those new patterns, creating new memory, what we call priorities. What's more important, fortifying the body's reserves, so building basically a foundation that the body has reserves, and then the other piece is the time frame and the consistency. You have to be consistent. You can't, once you stop doing it, the other pattern takes over. You can't, it's like bailing water out of a boat. If you have a hole in your boat, you got to keep bailing that water out. If you stop, the water's coming back in. So that's kind of what happens with your memory patterns. You have to keep bailing that water until you get to a safe place, or you get to shore, or you patch that hole. But if you don't, you have to keep bailing.
So, Dr. Rosen, here we are. We're talking about the brain. We're talking about the nervous system. We're talking about personal change. I would love to, segue that into the topic of really chiropractic and how that might factor into this whole process. Here you are, you've been a clinician for, 32 plus years, working with children, working with adults, all kinds of health challenges. How does chiropractic impact the nervous system, impact the brain, impact who we are when it comes to health?
So,
I know that's a big question.
No, it's funny you said it because it's always for me such a simple question and such a simple answer that I give thousands of times a day. I must have given it millions of times in my life, but for some reason the impact is almost like people can't get it. So the basic tenet in what I understand in chiropractic is that chiropractic deals with the nervous system. Very simple. It doesn't deal with the bones and joints only. It deals how those bones and joints, or the misalignment, or what we call subluxation, those bone joints impact the function of the nervous system. And that's what people get. So if you have a backache, you don't just have a backache. You have a backache that has a global effect on the rest of your body. If you have a headache, you don't just have a headache. It has a global effect. So, which maybe we'll get to talk about a little bit later. So in a mechanistic model, or a medical model, you treat the backache or the headache or the neckache or whatever the symptom is, or the digestive issue of it. But you don't understand that it's a global issue. So in chiropractic, we tried to coin this term called subluxation. And basically we tried to coin the term subluxation that people understood that it has a whole global effect. So for example, if you have a backache and you have what we call a subluxation, it affects the motion of the joint. Okay, we agree, we do that. The next thing it affects is the neurology around that joint, the proprioceptors, the nociceptors, the afferent input that comes from that joint. It also affects the tension on the nerve. Changing the tension on a nerve, therefore changes that way that nerve works, where that nerve fires, just like tuning a guitar string. So that also changes the muscles around it, what we call myopathology. The muscles are also attached to what we call the fascia, which is the tissue around the muscle. That system is also attached to what we call the dermomeningeal system, which is the system that protects the spinal cord. That also deals with what we call cerebrospinal fluid, which bathes the spinal cord in the brain and gives it nutrients and protects it. That also deals with the autonomic nervous system, which is located in your thoracic and lumbar spine, and then your parasympathetic, which is in your sacrum and your occiput. And that controls all your autonomic function, which is how you breathe, how you eat, how you think, how you feel, and that goes 24/7. That also then affects your mental capabilities, your mental impulses. It changes the way your body adapts to its environment. It changes the fault-tolerant mechanism. It changes your cognitive abilities. So that is a known fact, which a lot of the world won't accept. And it's really a paradigm shift. You have to understand, just like we talk about quantum physics and we're all connected, and people give that a lot of verbiage, but we live in an environment in a society that doesn't really live that through. I mean, you can see that by looking at our environment and what we do to it. It's the same thing as your internal external environment. You can smash a door, and that has a global effect on your entire system. If you smash your finger in a door and take your heart rate, it's going to raise up. If you smash your finger in a door and check your corticosteroid levels, they're going to raise up. You're going to go into a fight state. If you smash your finger in a door and someone comes over to you and asks you a question, you're going to be really irritable and tell them to shut up and leave me alone because I'm busy screaming. So that's a really simple. Now imagine that constant input into your nervous system, even if it's a low-level pain that's constantly nagging at you. It's like someone who's constantly asking the same question over and over again. Eventually, no matter how calm you are, you're going to eventually lash out and say, hey, idiot, I answered that question 4 times. Well, your body's doing that same thing. It's decreasing its tolerant and adaptability level by what we call subluxations. And it's a global effect. So that's very simply what happens is in a chiropractic world, when we evaluate your spine, your nervous system, we're evaluating the functional capabilities of not just the joints, the bones, the ligaments, tissues, but how the nervous system is reading and how it's working. So in my office, if I evaluate somebody, they may have a whole list of symptoms that they never even told me about because they didn't think chiropractic can help it with it. And all of a sudden, after a couple of weeks under care, they'll say, doc, my stomach doesn't hurt anymore. I don't get headaches anymore. I don't have to go to the bathroom every hour or whatever it is, or I'm not yelling at my children all the time. I feel much more relaxed. So we know, for example, that chiropractic adjustments, and there's been studies, they change brainwave patterns. They actually can change different brainwave patterns. They improve neurological function through our nervous system. They can reduce the fight or flight response. They can affect motor balance. They can affect coordination. They can affect excessive signaling. We talked about neuroplastic patterns. If you have a neurological irritation that's constantly sending what we call afferent, which are impulses into the brain, constantly, they sensitize that pathway, that make that pathway more open. So if that's a pain pathway, they make you more susceptible to pain. I love the commercial on fibromyalgia where they said, I have this pain, I have these aches, and I went to my doctor. My doctor said I have fibromyalgia. And fibromyalgia are nerves that are constantly being fired off that are causing my muscles to be tight. Really? And what my doctor's going to do is prescribe something to cut off that impulse. Not going to find the cause of it. They're going to cut off those impulses so my nerves can't fire. I'm sorry, I want my nerves to fire. But what I love about the commercial, it's like this new realization that, wow, muscles get triggered by nerves. So that's that's the whole idea. So chiropractic care, chiropractic adjustment, change those neurological inputs. If you have an afferent input that's due to pain or pressure in a joint, and you change the pressure or pain on that joint, you're going to change that afferent impulse. And what ultimately is affected by it is also the immune system. The immune system is neurologically mediated as well, so it improves your immune system function. I mean, I'm sure you deal with it all the time, and I do. When I was growing up in school, a couple of kids had allergies, a couple of kids had asthma. No kid I ever knew walked around with an EpiPen. Now, kids have allergies to everything, be it peanut, soy, gluten, bees, whatever it is, and there are kids walking around with EpiPens all the time. So that's an immune system that's being destroyed and being damaged. And I'm taking care of kids with allergies to peanuts, with allergies to soy, diagnosed with allergies to environmental allergies, chronic asthma. And by making adjustments to their spine, reducing that neurological input, the nervous system, immune system mediates itself. It's not hyperactive, hypersensitive, and wow, the symptoms go away. The allergy is dissipated. It's gone. So that happens, and the other piece that happens is we change the actual genetic ability of the body that is predisposed to genetic imbalances. We can actually change or mediate how those genetic imbalances or the genetic disease processes manifest themselves. So I think it's a pretty powerful art. What I love about it is that when you frame it in a way that's real, it's not saying that we cure all diseases or treat all diseases, because that's not what we're saying. What we say is that we deal with the subtle substance of the nervous system and its ability to transmit or to take care of the body through what we consider the body's own innate intelligence. And that in and of itself increases the body's functional capability. And yes, some diseases go away. Yes, some diseases need other assistance. But the bottom line is, if I said to you, hey, Mark, I got this pill. Take this pill, and why don't you take this pill? It reduces inflammation in your body, helps your immune system function better, allows the joints in your body to function more normally, increases the ability of your body to cope for stress, makes your brain more cognitive, more functional capability, lowers the threshold at which you fire off your sympathetic nervous system, makes you calmer, healthier, stronger, smarter, faster, and maybe even prettier. And all you have to do is take this pill once a week for the rest of your life, and it's going to cost you $60 a week. Would you do it? In an instant, right? In an instant. And that's kind of what chiropractic does. Now, that pill is not going to stop you when you get hit by a car. That pill is not going to stop you if you smoke cigarettes and drink alcohol a day. It's going to give your body better adaptability, but it's not going to stop you from getting sick if you do things that are detrimental. So that, that's the piece. So if you have a baseline, which is what turned me on to chiropractic, where it says here, I'm giving you an opportunity to express your individual potential as a human being. Here's that opportunity. Now what you do with that opportunity is your choice. So for me, that's what the chiropractic paradigm is. It's allowing the body and the individual the opportunity to function at their highest level, their optimal level, in a neurologically based, physiological, emotional way. And how that manifests itself is obviously different with all of us. We're not all going to be great athletes. We're not all going to be able to, be Mozarts or none of that's going to happen to be great. But we will reach our potential for whatever that may be. So that's how I kind of see it.
Well, I have to say, my inborn bias here. I grew up in a chiropractic household. My dad was a chiropractor. Starting in the early 50s. I remember there was maybe a 3 or 4 year period where I didn't get chiropractic. I was away, I moved to California, and subsequently when I finally got another chiropractic treatment after having not had it for about 3 or 4 years, I remember the first thing I said to myself was, oh, the lights came back on. That was the best kind of like that's what my brain came up with. Oh, my lights just came back on. And I think a lot of people, and I'm saying this to those who just aren't accustomed to chiropractic care, a lot of us understand the concept of, oh my goodness, there's something going on with your heart. We take you to a cardiologist. There's something going on with your digestion. We take you to a gastroenterologist. We don't always think of the nervous system. Particularly, maybe we'll think of a neurologist, but the nervous system is saying so more because here it's really functioning throughout the whole body. And really no traditional medical specialty has really wrapped itself around the nervous system as has chiropractic.
Right, or as a healing art. I mean, you have neurologists who treat it. Well, I mean, you just made a really good point. So it's not that one system is right or wrong, or I'm not going to be the judge of that, but one system is a mechanistic system that is designed to treat the system when it's in disease. Chiropractic is designed to treat the system regardless of disease or in a state of health and maintain it. So that's what the big paradigm shift is. So yeah, if you come to me and you have heart disease and you have coronary arteries and 6 of your coronary arteries are blocked, the odds are I can adjust you from now to kingdom come, and they're not going to unblock if you're 50, 60 years old. You have to do something about that. But if you come to me when you're 6 months old and I make those adjustments, maybe, just maybe, your nervous system and your brain will get to the place where it functions in a positive way, and you will never even create the lifestyle choices that make you, when you're 50 or 60 years old, have 6 coronary arteries blocked. Mm-hmm. The big difference is a big paradigm shift. That's what it's about. I know that there are people out there that talk about chiropractic and low back pain, and PTs treat low back and acupuncturists treat low back, and everybody treat. It's like we're not treating low back pain. We're trying to treat the cause of the low back pain, but more importantly, we're trying to treat what that symptom is actually telling your body. What is that expressing? Like, why is that low back pain there? Sometimes you go to medical doctors and they don't really care about the why you got there. They just want to care about how to stop it. They don't sit down and wonder about, well, you were an athlete in college and you got banged around and you fell on your tail. It doesn't go there. It's like, I have a low back pain today. Let's take an MRI. Oh, look, you have a ruptured disc. We'll treat the ruptured disc. Well, how did you get a ruptured disc and the guy next to you not have a ruptured disc? It's just a different paradigm. And I think that's what makes it, for me, interesting, and for others, difficult.
Yeah, well, here for that. I'm such a it boggles my mind sometimes how chiropractic philosophy, the profession, to me, even though there's more chiropractors now than when I was a kid, it still feels like it hasn't taken hold in the culture as it should, relative to what I think the need is for it.
Well, I agree. That's a big frustration in the chiropractic profession, and we have reached the tipping point. And you're right. I don't know why we haven't reached the tipping point yet. That place where it becomes mainstream. In some areas, it's mainstream, but especially in the globe. You're thinking about the United States. It's not weird to talk about chiropractic. Go to Africa. There's a lot of places where globally chiropractic hasn't reached that tipping point, or in the United States yet either. And if I had the answer to that, then I would obviously do even more than I do to try and do that. But yeah, it's a tough one, and I think it's just a matter of number one, keep plugging away. Number two, which maybe we'll get to talk a little bit about the indoctrination of our brains and our nervous system in a paradigm that's much different than that.
Yeah. So we're coming to that time. I want to close out, and at the same time, I want to ask you if there's one or two words of wisdom, pieces of advice that you want to leave us with when it comes to just sort of the personal science of personal change
Right.
that you feel is just a good nugget of wisdom for us to come away with.
I think that kind of what I said before is that if you're going to make a change, if you're going to make a change in the way you live your life, if you're going to make a change in your health, then you really have to do two things. One is you have to take personal responsibility. The baggage that you carry, the situation that you're in, is pretty much the situation that you're in because you're there. A guy who keeps having relationships one after the other, and each time he's in a different relationship, it's the other person's fault why they break up. And after 8 or 9 relationships, he finally goes, wow, the only common denominator to all these relationships is me. So we need to see where our personal responsibility is in this whole scenario. We need to, and I'm not saying you can never feel sorry for yourself, because there are instances where you may want to feel sorry for yourself for a little while, but you can't wallow in that. So you have to understand that, number one, you have to take personal responsibility. Number two, what I think is important, this is just my side note because I see a lot of this, is you really have to think outside of yourself. Outside of yourself. What is the global effect you're having? So wallowing in a state of disease, being sick, focusing on your health, what does that do? How does that drain the rest of society? So you have to get to a place where you're healthy enough to be able to give back. I think that's another thing important. You have to let go of the me a little bit and think of the we. I think that's really, really important. You have to also shift your paradigm. If we're talking about health, that health is not just the absence of disease. It's a state of being. It's a state of vitality, energy, creativity, higher consciousness. It's a state of awareness in your intelligence. It's not just, oh, I'm not sick today. You can be sick and still be healthy. If you go out and eat something bad and you end up with food poisoning, that's a healthy body. But you don't feel too good. Or if you do something that if you go out and you exercise a little too hard and you're sore, you may not feel great, but that's a healthy body. That's the body discharging lactic acid, reducing inflammation. It's doing its job. So health is a state, not just a lack of disease. The other thing, I guess, is life is not about having bad or negative experiences. We're all going to have those experiences. There are things that impact our system in a positive or negative way, but it's how you process them is what's really important. It's what importance you give to them and how they affect yourself in your worldview. Understanding you're a compilation of what came before you and respecting. That's the other thing. Respecting what came before you. Respecting on whose shoulders you have grown on. Like where you got to, whether it be your parents, whether it be your mentors, whether it be your kids, whatever it be you, whatever it is, understanding that you got to where you are by standing on other people's shoulders. So that's a really important factor. I think that also separates the me world to the we world. You understand that this is a global aspect. Mm-hmm. So I think those are the things that I find the most important. Disease is a threshold issue. It's not a one-time thing. It's your inability to adapt and understand that. What is it? I think W.C. Fields said something. As far as your personal understanding of who you are and what you are and how strong you are in yourself. It's not what they call you that matters. It's what you answer to. And I think that's true. So when you get these impacts, it's how you process information, bring it up through your consciousness, and are able to not only process it in a way that you maintain healthy, but in a way that you're also able to respect what came before you and be able to give back in a positive way to the world and environment around you.
Very well put.
It's wisdom.
Very well put, my friend. Thank you so much, and I'm wondering if you can just share with viewers and listeners how they can stay in touch with you and your world.
Okay. Best way to get in touch with me or stay in touch with me is just go on my website. It has all my information on how to contact me. It has my newsletters. It has my DVDs, my lectures, where I'm teaching, and a few pithy words of wisdom occasionally. And that is Wellesley, WELLESLEY, Chiro, CHIRO.com. And like I said, if you go on that website, you can find out my office hours, anything you really want to know about me in the professional world, you can find out there. We also have several Facebook sites. And again, so just go find me on Facebook. I have a site for Dr. Martin Rosen. I have my own Martin Rosen site. I have a site for Pediatric Chiropractic. I have a site for my office, for Wellesley Chiropractic Office. And you can catch me on Twitter at hashtag Dr. Martin Rosen. So I'm out there socially. On LinkedIn, it's the same. You can just put my name on LinkedIn and I'll come up there. So any of those social media aspects, you can find me. My website has all the links for those places as well. And we'll be glad to answer questions, facilitate your healthcare, help you find a chiropractor, whatever you need. We'll be happy to try and help you.
Dr. Martin Rosen, thanks for your time. Thanks for being so generous, and thanks for really giving us a great download about chiropractic and the nervous system and personal change and the brain. Very much appreciated, sir.
And thank you, Mark, for doing all the work you and Emily do, and I appreciate you asking me to join this conference again. I really enjoyed it, and we'll see you soon.
My pleasure. Thank you so much. This has been Marc David on behalf of the second annual Online Eating Psychology Conference. I've been with Dr. Martin Rosen. Lots more to come, my friends. Take care.